Okay. Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for joining us on Zoom. Oh, Shalom Aleichem. Wow. Beautiful. Leah, welcome, Sally. Welcome. Okay, amazing. Amen. You guys, go for the sushi over here. All right, gentlemen, let's go. So, first of all, we would like to dedicate tonight's learning for the Refuah Shlema Kol Cholei Israel, especially the Refuah Shlema of Yisrael Mordechai ben Evelyn, Shmuel Moshe ben Penina, also of Yaakov Yisrael Abba Mekan Esther Helen, Rabbi Baruch and Zivya. If we have any other names to add, Shed ben Devorah, Rachel bat Shoshana, any other names to add to Refuah Shlema? Okay, let's go. Okay, so may Hashem send them all a speedy recovery b'toch shar cholei Israel. Okay, so this week's parasha is Parashat Yitro, and this is the parasha of Ma'amad Har Sinai. Ma'amad Har Sinai is the revelation of Hakadosh Baruch Hu at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai, when Hashem revealed Himself to the entire world, to Am Yisrael, and gave us the Torah Kedosha. And Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the 10 Commandments, right? Okay, very important. The Jews that were living in Yemen in the year 1172 were in a predicament. They had a few issues that were going on. The first issue was that there was what they called Gzerat Shmad. There was a forced conversion on the Jews of Yemen, where they were being forced to convert, I believe it was to Islam at the time, and they were in a big dilemma of what to do and how to hold on, and they were, facing a really difficult situation. Number two, there was unfortunately a Jewish fellow that became a goy, meaning he left the Jewish faith. You can't ever really become a goy; it doesn't exist, because when you're a Jew, you're a Jew forever. That's why when a goy converts and becomes Jewish, there's no turning back. Shalom Aleichem. Hello. Right? There's no turning back. There's nothing you can do about it. Once you're a Jew forever. So this guy, he was born Jewish, but then he left the faith, so to say, and he went and told the authorities that the Jewish Torah is against the goyim. It's against the goyim. There are all kinds of things that we have in the Torah that go against the goyim. If you want, you can make a case, and it's not so hard. You could say something like, "Yeah, look, they say in the Gemara that you're not human. It says Atem Kiruyim Adam, Ve'en Ha'akum Kiruyim Adam. The goyim are not called human, right? That's what it says. So look, they don't think you're human. That's why they can steal from you. They can do this to you. They can do that to you." And he was making a whole big fuss, and the authorities really were turning their attention to the Jews in a very negative way. It was very sad. Number three, there was a false prophet, Navi Sheker, that went ahead and started telling everyone that Mashiach is coming, and which is not a bad thing, but in the way that he was doing it, it was very bad. So they were in a yeah. We're talking about 1172 in Yemen. I don't know. It wasn't a real prophet. It was some guy. Yeah. So this guy was saying all kinds of things, and the Jews started following him and making all kinds of issues. So the rabbis in Yemen sent a letter to the Rambam. At the time, the Rambam was already living in Egypt. Yeah, he was from Spain, but he had moved to Egypt. He became the physician to the king of Egypt, and he was already in Egypt. So everybody had heard about the Rambam. And what happened was he received this letter from them. And what he did was he wrote them back a letter, which was called Igeret Teman, the letter to Yemen. Hello. Oh, shalom aleichem. Nice to see you. Looking good. Thank you. So he writes them a letter, Igeret Teman. And in this letter, he says one main point that he tells them. I'm going to read to you what he says. He says, you have to, first of all, strengthen one another, give chizuk to each other, strengthen each other, that you should never leave the Torah Kedosha. And part of how you can strengthen yourself is, he says the following, Zichru Ma'amad Har Sinai. You have to remember Har Sinai, the fact that we all stood at Har Sinai. Shetzivanu HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezachor tamid. Hashem commanded us to remember the revelation at Har Sinai always. V'gam hiziranu, Hashem warned us, shelo l'shachecho. He said, never forget it. V'tzivanu lelamed oto lebanenu. He commanded us to teach it to our sons. It says in the pasuk, Rak hishamer lecha, ushmor nafshecha meod. Listen to the language. Rak hishamer lecha. He says, you have to be very careful. Shmor nafshecha meod. Protect your soul. Thank you so much.
That's the Torah also.
Yeah, the Torah says this. Yeah, that's what he's quoting. He says, protect your soul very much. En tishkach, because God forbid you should forget. Et hadivarim, the things, asher ra'u einecha, that your eyes saw. Upen yasuru milvavecha, and lest they go away from your heart. Kol yemei chayecha, all the days of your life. V'hoda'atam, you have a mitzvah to teach them. Levanecha, to your children. V'livnei banecha, to your children's children, your grandchildren. Yom asher amadeta lifnei Hashem elokecha b'chorev, the day that you stood before Hashem, your God, at Har Sinai. That's what the pasuk says. Says the Rambam, you have a mitzvah to remember Ma'amad Har Sinai, the fact that we stood at Mount Sinai and we saw Hashem reveal himself to us. It was one of the most incredible revelations ever. He says to them, V'ra'ui lachem achenu. He says, my brothers, it is good for you, it's appropriate for you. Shetegadlu b'nechem ala ma'amad hahu hagadol. You have to raise your children with the knowledge of that ma'amad, with that moment in history where we were standing by the foot of Har Sinai. V'tesapru betoch kahal ve'edah. Talk about it in front of everybody. Gdulato, how great it was. Hidro, how beautiful it was. Shehu amud shehaemunah sovevet alav, because this is the pillar of our faith. That's what our faith revolves around. This story, Ma'amad Har Sinai. V'gidelu ha'ma'amad, make it great. Al kol gdula, however great you're able to make it. So says the Rambam, our faith as Jews is based on one thing. Ma'amad Har Sinai. Okay? The revelation that we had at Har Sinai when HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to each and every Jew. Hashem spoke to each and every Jew. And he told them, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God. And by the way, one of the most interesting Midrashim is that the word Anochi, which means I am, is actually an Egyptian word. It's a very interesting thing, because it says that really in Hebrew the word is Ani. What's Anochi? So Anochi says, if you want to say in Egypt I, you say Anoch. That's how you say I. That's apparently how it used to be in Egyptian. So Anochi is an Egyptian word. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said it to them in quote unquote the language that they're familiar with. It's a very interesting thing. So Anochi Hashem Elokecha, they all heard it. They all heard Hashem, so to say, made it more palatable to them, because he knew that it's every single Jewish person that's there who's listening, who's going to hear. They all heard HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking. Wow. Anochi Hashem lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai. They all heard those words. You will not have a foreign God. So there was a revelation of God in the world at that time. Now, why is this so important? The reason that this is so important, the Kuzari speaks this out. The Kuzari is a book about a king, that he was the king of a group of people called the Kuzarim people. He was their king. And he went around, he was searching for, it was a very philosophical book.
Is it real?
What? I don't know if it's real, but it's a way for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the author of this book, to express the very important concepts of Judaism. So over here, the Kuzari comes and tells the Jewish Chacham, he says, how do you know that what you're doing is true? So the Kuzari says, you know how I know? Because our faith is very different than other faiths. He says, other faiths, they revolve around one guy. there was one guy, he had a revelation, whether it be this one or whether it be that one, right? There was a certain person, he had a revelation. Then he went and he taught his disciples, and then they went and they spread it. And then it became, yeah, exactly. It became almost violent at a certain, with the Crusades and by fire and by sword, for this group and for that group, and they forced it on many other nations. You should know, Constantine, right, was the one that did that for the Roman Empire, turned it into a Christian society. This is all by force. It's not by, there's no choice in the matter. This is something that it's either you do or die. But Am Yisrael, we never had that. Says the Chacham to the Melech HaKuzarim, he says, our faith claims that you had 600,000 men from 20 to 60, and a total of 3 million people, all hearing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, each and every one of them. It wasn't one person. So now it's different. And the problem is, you're going to say, well, maybe the Torah conveniently writes that. Maybe it's something that the Torah thinks that you'll be more convinced if it says that. So the one guy, quote unquote, God forbid, who says that, he wrote it like that, so you should be more convinced. Maybe that's the argument. The answer is that the fact that we had generations of people that have been abiding by the laws of the Torah is the biggest proof that it's emet, that it's true. Because we as regular people have no desire to keep the laws that make life difficult for us. There are many laws that make life very challenging for us. For example, Pesach is very hard to clean and all these things. People want to eat non-kosher food. People like shrimp, people like lobster, people want to have relations with whoever they feel like. They don't want to have to be married and all these things. They want to do whatever they want to do. They don't like rules, right? The only thing that could make me keep a rule of the Torah, the only thing is if I know for a fact that it's true. Otherwise, why would I do it? You understand? There's no good reason. Even as a Jewish nation, most of us are not keeping it. We don't like this stuff. As a human being, we don't want to be told what to do. The fact that initial group of people did it, and nobody had a sword to their neck saying, listen, you have to do this or I kill you, right? They had to accept it because they understood. They almost had no choice. Like HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself to them. There's no question about it. So they said, Na'aseh v'nishma. They understood this is Hashem talking to them. Literally. Actually, HaKadosh Baruch Hu talking to them.
They went from Egypt. They went to the sea.
Exactly. Exactly. That's another very good point, which Mr. Yaakov is saying very nicely. There's a question. We just said, Hashem said, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Asher hotzeticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibet avadim. Right? I am Hashem, your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt from the house of slavery. Question. Why do you have to mention Egypt? We all know we were just slaves who took us out. How come you don't say, I am Hashem, your God, who created Shamayim va'aretz? I created heaven, earth, I created everything. I'm giving you everything. Why do you have to say Mitzrayim, Egypt, right? Rabbeinu Bachye asked this question. Rabbeinu Bachye says the reason is because he would rather talk about something they saw with their own eyes. He wants them to remember, you saw with your own eyes, I split the sea for you. You saw I brought plagues on the Egyptian. You saw it. It's not heaven and earth. You weren't around for heaven and earth. You weren't there for that. But you understand the point?
There were 12 million and they became 3. Meaning so many people they lost their families or other people.
Shalom, shalom.
You said it, right? We said it that 12 million Jews.
Yeah.
In the end, they came out 3 million.
So correct. Yeah, that's right.
9 million of them gone.
That's right. Again, the point is that this is something that they saw. Again, that too, they saw with their own eyes. They were aware that this is what happened. So, and by the way, That's why everything that we do always, that's the reason that this is mentioned in the 10 Commandments, Yetziat Mitzrayim. Everything, so many things that we do is always a Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim. It's commemoration for the exodus of Egypt. We say Shema in the morning. We mentioned you have to remember in the morning and in the evening, Yetziat Mitzrayim. We left Egypt. Hashem took us out of Egypt. We have tefillin on our heads, Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim. We say Kiddush Friday night, Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim. All the holidays, Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim. Everything is Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim. Same reason. Because the problem is like this. The problem is that if we can even have, let's say, how long ago was the Holocaust? 70, 80 years ago, right? 1930s, not even 100 years old yet. And there are still people, human scumbags, filth, that have the audacity to stand up and say the Holocaust never happened, and that millions and millions of Jews who were killed, they never died. And people walking around with the numbers on their arms, that's not real. They're still walking around with the numbers on their arms. So if even something like that can happen, right? So then there's no choice but to do something drastic and to commemorate, to make a memorial, to do something, Holocaust Remembrance Day, whatever you want to do. But you have to do something so that people will not be able to deny it and say this never happened and it's fake. And this is just 100 years ago. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made it that all the mitzvot that we're doing all the time is Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim, to remember the exodus from Egypt. Remember it. Why? So that if some person down the road ever comes to deny it, you say, excuse me, how come for generations we're eating matzah the night of the Seder? How come for generations, my parents, their grandparents, how come as far back as we know in human history, since it happened, how come we have tefillin on our heads and we have Kiddush Friday night? Why? Because that's Hashem's way to say, remember it. Don't let yourself ever forget. Why? Because that's the cornerstone of our faith. Same thing over here. That's what we just read before. Says the Rambam. Be very careful. Don't ever forget the fact that you heard HaKadosh Baruch Hu talking to you. It says, Vayara Am et hakolot. Right? Exactly. They saw the voices. How do you see a voice? How do you see a sound? Yes. Yes. Achad zu shamati. Achad zu badi, shnayim zu shamati. Exactly. Shnayim zu shamati. How do you ever forget such a thing? Well, it's very possible. Very possible. You will forget. But therefore, says the Rambam, never forget. That's the mitzvah of Har Sinai. And therefore, Rabotai, it's so important for us to understand this foundation. Therefore, that idea that we all initially accepted the rules of the Torah, and again, remember, we don't like these things. We don't, as a human being, we don't like rules. And the Torah even says that when we received the mitzvah of forbidden marriages, women that we're not allowed to be with. It says, Vayishma Am Buche Lemishpechotav. Moshe heard the people crying in their families. Says the Gemara, what does it mean they're crying in their families? Buche al iskei mishpechotav. They were crying about the fact that now that they got the Torah, there are women they cannot be with.
But
they were crying about that.
Weren't they moral in Egypt?
Moral in Egypt is one thing, but that's with Egyptians. They didn't mess around with Egyptians, but technically,
they were slaves. How could they mess around with anybody else?
Well, first of all, not all of them were slaves. Some of them actually had wealth, but besides for that, there are moments of opportunity. A person wants to take advantage of something, he wants to do it. What if it's not an Egyptian woman? Maybe it's a regular single girl he wants to do it. There's no rule saying you can't do that technically. Comes along the Torah Kedusha, boom, he can't. Forbidden. Asur. Lo tiyeh kedeshah mibnot Yisrael. Lo yekadesh mibnei Yisrael. You can't do it. You have to give her a ketubah. You have to put a ring on her finger. You have to go into the whole set of rules. Wow! They literally were crying.
Why would they say Nasser?
That's what I'm trying to say. It says Nas. Thank you so much. They said Naaseh v'nishma because it says in this week's parasha, it says Kafa elehem har kegigit. Hashem held the mountain over them and said, if you accept the Torah Kedusha, then very good. If you don't, then the world goes back. L'tov avo, sham tekvuatchem. That's the end of everything. So the idea is that the fact that we accepted the Torah, that we have Jewish people today that don't eat meat cooked with milk, right? That is the biggest testament that at the time it was real. Understand? Otherwise, the ball would have never gotten rolling. What was there? Was there anybody going around saying that he's the God, he's the Son of God, that he's a prophet, and going around and saying either you follow suit or I kill you? We never had that. That never happened. So then how could the ball get rolling? The only way is one way, if we heard Hashem. And also, all the biggest faiths in the world, they believe that we heard Hashem. And they base it off that. They just say that things changed. That's why the Rambam is telling the Jews of Yemen, the cornerstone of the Emunah is Ma'amad Har Sinai. That's the cornerstone. It's important to remember that. It's very important because nowadays there are a lot of different things that people attach their faith to. But that's really not the main thing. The main thing is Ma'amad Har Sinai. That's the most important thing.
How does that refute the false prophet, though, that came?
Because the Torah Kedusha tells us if any false prophet ever starts saying things that go against the Torah, which is what apparently this fellow was doing, then you know he's automatically a false prophet. Because a prophet will never, ever, if he's a real prophet, he will never say something against the Torah. The only time that there was a question like that was actually with Eliyahu HaNavi, and he brought a sacrifice outside of the temple, and you're not allowed to bring a sacrifice outside the temple. But the Rambam says it was just Hora'at Shah. He wasn't saying to do this always. He was just saying I have to refute the prophets of the Baal. So that's the only reason why he did it. But he never said I'm allowed to do this in general, or this is right. False prophets that claim against the Torah says offer their head on the spot.
Yeah.
Eliyahu Bahar Karmel, exactly. So that was a big problem technically. You can't bring a korban outside of the Bet HaMikdash. It's a Yisur Karet, very, very grave sin.
They did it after Yeshua's time. They did it
because the temple wasn't built yet. The temple wasn't built yet. That's why. Because so long as the temple wasn't built, there was what they call heter bamot. You could have a private altar in your backyard. But once the temple was built, no such thing. So if a prophet gets up and says something against the Torah, so Rambam is telling them, guys, remember Har Sinai? What did we get when we got the Torah? The Torah tells us that if any prophet ever says a false prophecy, he says that Hashem changed the Torah one letter. Kill him. He's dead. Yeah.
So when the Jewish people did the calf?
This was after. This was after. Yes, this was after.
Wow.
Yes.
How long after?
Not long after.
Just
not long after. That's why it says. That's why it says that it's a. That's why it says that it was like a bride who was committing adultery at the chuppah. Understand? She just got married and she's committing adultery at the chuppah. That's what it says. It's like.
Now you confuse me.
Okay.
With the timeline.
It was shortly after. It wasn't a long.
So it's the Siva, right?
When did Moshe Rabbeinu come down from the mountain? 17th day of Tammuz.
Okay.
Okay. So it's 40 days.
Right.
Since they got the Torah above Sivan. So you're talking about 40 days. It's a very short period of time.
That's why we fast 17th of Tammuz?
That's one of the reasons, yes.
But they weren't when he said the word Erev Rav.
What?
The golden calf, the word Erev Rav.
That was definitely part of it. Yes.
איך כל כך הרבה יהודים, 80% מהם, אלוהים הרג אותם, ואיך הוא נתן לערב רב לצאת עם עם ישראל?
It's a tough question. Apparently, they had more of a desire to leave Egypt than the 80%.
Wow.
That's a very, very scary thought. But I want to read to you what the Rambam says himself. The Rambam says like this. He says, we don't believe in magic, in just things like that. Somebody does a quote unquote miracle, we don't all of a sudden bow down to the guy. Moshe Rabbeinu lo haaminu bo Yisrael mipnei ha'otot she'asa. This is the Rambam, Perek Chet, Milchot Yesodei HaTorah, Halacha Aleph. The Jews didn't believe in Moshe because of the miracles that he did. She'ama'amin al pi ha'otot yesh belibo dofi. Person who believes in quote unquote miracles, something that he's off. If it's possible the person might use sleight of hand, maybe black magic, but it's not real, right? So he says, Ela, rather. So he says, why then did we believe? I'm skipping a little bit. He says, why did we believe in Moshe? Because b'ma'amad Har Sinai, because when we were at Har Sinai, our eyes saw Vilozar, not somebody else, not somebody telling us. We ourselves saw, right? Our ears heard and nobody else. We saw ha'esh ve'hakolot ve'halapidim, the fire, the sounds, the flames. Ve'hu nigash el arafel. Moshe approached the cloud. Ve'akol medaber elav. The voice was speaking to Moshe. Ve'anu shom'im, Moshe, Moshe. We were hearing Hashem tell Moshe, Moshe, Moshe. Go tell the Jews this and that. Hashem spoke to you face to face. So we heard all of this, and then we heard the following. Which means that Hashem is telling Am Yisrael, I'm allowing your ears to tune into my conversation with Moshe, so you hear that I'm talking to him, and that way you know that he's legit, because I'm telling you he's legit. You understand? It's not because he turned a stick into a snake. That's not a reason to believe him, but it's because you hear me speaking, and you hear me speaking to Moshe, telling him what to do. That's the reason you should believe him. You understand? It's not because of the quote-unquote miracles. That's what the Rambam says. So therefore, everything that's going on in this week's Parasha is because our entire faith is based on this, on Har Sinai. And our faith in Moshe Rabbeinu as the leader and the giver of the Torah is based on this as well. It's very important. So now you'll ask a very important question. So we get the 10 commandments in this week's Parasha. Very good 10 commandments. But what is so significant about 10 commandments? We know that every single mitzvah in the Torah is equally as important in terms of the count of 613. There's no question that, let's say, not eating meat and milk is just as much as a mitzvah as not, let's say, stealing, right? Or not swearing falsely. There's no question about it that if a person denies that there's a mitzvah that you're not allowed to eat meat cooked together with milk, and versus denying that you're not allowed to swear falsely, which is one of the 10 commandments, either way, he's a kofir. He's denying the Torah. So why the big halabaloo, so to say, quote unquote, about the 10 commandments? Why? Why do you have to put them on 2 stone tablets? Why do you have to make a big deal about these mitzvot? You should know, by the way, halachically, there's a whole big back and forth about whether or not a community is allowed to stand up during the reading of the 10 commandments.
Yeah.
There are most Ashkenazi shuls, from what I know, they stand up during the reading of the 10 commandments.
Even
Now you should know.
You do in Iran.
In Iran?
Yeah.
So you should know.
Some rabbi they say no, you don't have to.
So look, so it's a whole big discussion al pi halacha.
Yeah.
Harav Ovadia Yosef alav hashalom wrote a long teshuvah explaining how wrong it is to stand up during the 10 commandments. He explains that you're sending the wrong message. It's as if to say that the mitzvah of not swearing falsely is more important than the mitzvah of not plowing with a donkey and a cow at the same time, right? It's as if you're sending that message, and therefore, says Rav Ovadia, it is forbidden for a shul to stand up for that. One second. So I just want to lay out the arguments, and then you'll tell me what you ask, okay? So that's Rav Ovadia's position. you should know, interestingly enough, Rabbi Yashiv, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, agreed to this position of Chacham Ovadia, and he wouldn't have people standing up in the shul, apparently, for the 10 Commandments. Yeah, everybody have a seat. So they talk about what do you do if you're in a place where they all are standing. Halacha also says, Makom she'omdim ad Hashem, right? In a place where they all are standing, don't sit down, right? So you got to go with the tzibur. So they say if you're stuck in a place like that, then what you should do is before the reading of the Torah, the 10 Commandments, you should already stand. The Aliyah before stand up. So that way you're already standing the Aliyah before they get to the 10 Commandments. So they're standing up for that. You're already standing. You didn't stand up just for the 10 Commandments. But the question is, but there are communities that stand, right? There are communities. What? There's something over here. For some reason, HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided to take these particular 10 mitzvot, honor your mother and father, remember the Shabbat. Hashem took these 10 and decided to put them on 2 stone tablets. There's a question here. Why did Hashem do that? Right?
It's our foundation. Those are the foundation. Yeah. Our religion.
Those are the foundation. Okay. So what? Okay. So what do you want to say?
I'm going to say if it wasn't as important, why would God put it on the tablets? Meaning it.
Exactly.
There's
so you're saying there's something here.
There's something
here that Hashem singled out these 10 and decided to put them on 2 stone tablets.
If you told me to commit, God forbid, commit adultery,
right,
or eat a sandwich,
right,
with milk and meat,
right,
I would eat the sandwich with milk and meat, but I wouldn't commit adultery.
Correct, exactly.
So one is more important than the other.
Correct. That's true. But at the same time, let's say that the person is in the privacy of his own home, and somebody says to him, either I kill this person, right? And he's got a gun to the guy's head, or he says you could testify falsely, right? So you know what I'm saying? There's different levels, So you're right. Some of them you say, okay, avodah zarah, very bad. Killing, very bad. Adultery, very bad. You got to give it your life. Fine. I don't know, but stealing, technically. Yeah, no, I'm explaining. You're right. We have to address what's so special about these 10, more so than other commandments. So first of all, what? Yes.
That's the foundation of the world.
That's true. So first of all, I wanna share with you a midrash. The midrash says the following, and this is a midrash actually on Parashat Naso. Thank you, Parashat Naso. This midrash over here is very interesting. What do we say by the Nesiim? The Nesiim that brought the princes of the tribes, each one of them, 12 princes, they all brought the same, on the day of the inauguration of the Mishkan, rather, they brought the same korbanot, right? Korbanot, karat kesef achat, right? 20 umea mishkala, right? מזרק אחד כסף, 70 שקל ושקל הקודש, שניהם מלאים סולת, thank you, בלבב השם נזכור, כף אחת, 10 זהב, מלאה קטורת. There was one cup, one spoonful of weighing 10 shekel of gold, full of spices of incense. On that line, that each one of them brought a kaf achat melea zahav, kaf achat 10 zahav melea ketoret. It was full of ketoret. The Midrash says something very interesting. Okay, it says the following. He says, "What is this idea of melea ketoret? Full of incense." He says, the Midrash in Parashat Naso, Parasha Yud Gimel, Tet Zayin, Shetaryag mitzvot kelulot bahem. Says the Midrash, all 613 mitzvot are embedded within the 10 commandments. These 10 commandments contain all 613. Now look at what it says. V'chen ata motzeh taryag otiyot yesh min anochi Ad asher l're'echa. Keneged taryag mitzvot v'sheva yeterot keneged shiv'a yemei bereshit. Says the Midrash, if you count the letters from Anochi, the first one of the 10 commandments, all the way till the end, asher l're'echa, you will find 613 letters corresponding to the 613 mitzvot, plus an extra 7 corresponding to the 7 days of Bereshit. To tell you, Lelamedcha, says the Midrash, Shekol ha'olam lo nivra ela bizchut haTorah. To tell you that the whole world, 7 days of Bereshit, was all created in the merit of the Torah Kedusha. And what is that? What does this have to do with Ketoret? Says the Midrash, there's a concept in Torah called atbash. Atbash means that certain letters are interchangeable with one another. Aleph is interchangeable with Taf, because Aleph is the first, Taf is the last. Bet is interchangeable with Shin, because Shin is second to last. Gimel with Resh, and so on and so forth. So Daled is interchangeable with Kuf. So the Midrash says, Ketoret, if you interchange the Kuf with a Daled, you're left with Daled, Tet, Resh, Taf. Taf, Resh is 600. Taf, Tet, Daled is 9 plus 4, which is 13. So the Ketoret, 613, is also something that represents all 613 mitzvot. That's what the Midrash is saying over here. Kuf becomes Daled in Atbash. Now, why is it? I have a question on this. Why is it only changing one of the letters? Usually you change all 4 of the letters, but it's not me, it's Tanaim. The Midrash says it. I'll read it to you inside. It says, Sheken Kuf mitchalefet beDaled Atbash ve'olech cheshbon hateva achar ken leminyan taryag. Okay? So, you see over here, says the Midrash, that these 10 commandments contain with them, they have all 613 mitzvot. And that's really what Rashi tells us on this pasuk. I'm going to read it to you inside. The question is like this. It says over here, Vayomer elav. So Hashem tells Moshe, Lech red. Wait a second. This is 1/3. It says like this. Hashem tells Moshe at Ma'amad al Sinai. He says like this. Listen carefully.
Then they started eating fats.
Says like this. Vayomer Hashem and Moshe, Ale elai hahara. Hashem tells Moshe, come up to me on the mountain, ve'yeh sham, stay there. Ve'etena lecha et luchot ha'even, I'll give you the stone tablets. This is at the end of Mishpatim, next week's Parasha. Ve'ha-Torah, ve'ha-mitzvah, asher katavti lehorotam. So he says, come, I'll give you the luchot ha'even, the stone tablets, ve'ha-Torah, and I'll give you the Torah. Okay? So over here, Rashi says, what does it mean Hashem says, I will give you the Torah? Says Rashi, Kol 613 mitzvot, all 613 mitzvot, Bichlal Aseret HaDibrot. They are included in the Aseret HaDibrot. And Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon explains how each one of the 613 is attached to one of the 10 commandments. That's what Rashi says. So the Maharal says, why is Rashi saying this over here? He says, what is this idea that says, Et luchot ha'even ve'atorah ve'mitzvah? Why all of a sudden is Rashi explaining that all 613 mitzvot are included in the 10 commandments? What's the connection? He says like this, the Maharal says beautifully. He says, how could it possibly be that it's saying Hashem gave Moshe the Torah? Remember, what did the pasuk say? It says that Hashem says to Moshe, come up to me on the mountain and I'll give you the stone tablets. I'll give you the Torah. The stone tablets, I will give you the stone tablets means I'll physically give you the stone tablets. You will come down with stone tablets. wait a minute. Could Hashem, is it possible we know who wrote the Torah? Hashem told Moshe what to write. We said Moshe wrote it down. Hashem dictated it to Moshe. He didn't physically give him a Sefer Torah. You understand? Yeah. That's the problem. So what does it mean? Hashem says, I'm going to give you the stone tablets
And Torah.
and I'm going to give you the Torah. Hashem, you didn't give Moshe the Torah physically. Right? So what is it? That's what Rashi has to say. Hashem is giving him the 2 stone tablets, but the 2 stone tablets have in it the whole 613. That's what it means. Because it can't be that it's physically the Torah, because Hashem told Moshe what's right and Moshe wrote it down. It was Moshe who wrote the Torah, meaning based on Hashem's dictating it to him. But so it cannot be that Hashem physically gave him the Torah. So that's why Rashi has to explain when it says, I'm giving you the stone tablets and I'm giving you the Torah, it doesn't mean literally the actual Sefer Torah. It means the 613 mitzvot that are embedded in the 2 stone tablets. You follow it? So what we see over here is that what's unique about the Aseret HaDibrot is that the 2 stone tablets contained within them all 613 mitzvot. Now, it's very interesting. How are we doing on time over here, guys? We have time, okay. Very interesting. If you look later on in Sefer Devarim, so later on in Sefer Devarim, it tells us that Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, tells the whole Am Yisrael. Actually, Moshe is telling the whole Am Yisrael. I'm going to read to you from inside the pasuk. Hey, Perek Hey, pasuk Yutet, Sefer Devarim. It says like this. Right after the 10 Commandments in Vayitchanan, we know the 10 Commandments, Moshe Rabbeinu repeats them in Parasha Vayitchanan. Right after the 10 Commandments over there, he says, Et hadevarim ha'ele diber Hashem el kol ke'alchem bahar. Hashem spoke all of these words to the whole community by the mountain. Mitoch ha'esh ha'anan v'harafel kol gadol. From the fire, anan, there was a cloud, there was arafel, there was fog, kol gadol, a great sound, velo yasaf. Velo yasaf. Okay, that's the big question. What does it mean, velo yasaf? I can think of 2 other places in the Torah where it says the words velo yasaf. Okay? Velo yasaf comes up by Tamar and Yehuda. Tamar and Yehuda, remember the story that she had relations with Yehuda, her father-in-law. She was hiding pretending to be a harlot, and he went to her, and then it says velo yasaf ledata, and he did not yasaf to know her further. The question over there again, what does velo yasaf mean? It also has to do with when Moshe Rabbeinu took the 70 elders to help him with the burden of the Jewish people. At a certain point, they were complaining about the food, they were complaining about this, complaining about that. He said, Hashem, I need help. So he gets the 70 elders and he has his prophecy spread onto them so they could also have a tremendous level of prophecy. And it says, Velo yasafu. The question is, what does that mean? So everywhere you look, you'll see 2 explanations that are exactly the opposite. The first explanation says, Velo yasafu means it didn't happen anymore. So like to say lo hosif, it didn't have any more of that. So that would mean by Tamar and Yehuda that it was a one and done. He had relations with her. Velo yasaf. It didn't happen again. It says that these 70 elders became tremendous prophets. They got nevuah, but velo yasaf didn't continue. So over here, what this pasuk would mean is that there was a tremendous fire, tremendous cloud, fog, huge noise, velo yasaf, but then it stopped. It stopped. Lo yasaf. Okay? Now, the other pshat is exactly the opposite. Lo yasaf means he didn't stop. So Yehuda with Tamar, lo yasaf, he didn't stop. The 70 elders with their prophecy, lo yasafu, they didn't stop. They continued. It continued happening. Right over here, what this means is that the fire and the cloud and the smog and the kol gadol, the loud noise, lo yasaf, it never stopped.
That means Tamar again he slept with Yehuda.
That's what I'm saying. Yes, if you learn lo yasaf this way, it continued.
Who's saying that? The second.
So let me show you.
Second one.
Let me show you.
The
So
first one-
Rashi brings down two opinions.
Second one.
Let me show you over here. I'll show you. But we'll look it up everywhere. But let's start over here. Okay. So after the 10 Commandments in Vayetchanan, what does it say? Velo yasaf. Says Rashi, metargeminan velo pasak, which means it didn't stop. Didn't stop. Which means that the sound always was there. Okay. Now, over here says Rashi, davar acher lo yasaf lo hosif leharot beoto pumbi, which means that at that moment already it stopped. Lo hosif leharoto beoto pumbi, which means in that public gathering, no more. Right? It was done. Lo yasaf. Here, I'll show you by Tamar, just so that you see what I'm talking about. So here. Look.
Can we get sculpture there? Can
The
we get-
first one he said,
What is this? I
Huh?
stopped.
oh yeah,
It says,
makes sense. But the other one, you can continue, it doesn't make sense.
here. Vayomer tzadka mimeni. So Yehuda said she's right. Ki al ken lo netati le'shela b'ni. I never gave it to my son Shela. Velo yasaf od ledata. He never continued. He was lo yasaf to be with her. Says Rashi, what does it mean? Velo yasaf. Yesh omrim lo hosif. Some say it means he never was with her again. It was one and done. Yesh omrim lo pasak. Some say it means he never stopped.
But he gave
Okay,
her the
so it's the same machloket.
He gave her the staff. He gave
What?
her everything. He could have redeemed it the second time or the third time, the fourth time.
But
the
if you
fifth
didn't stop, why you didn't have no more children?
Yeah.
Because now you're
Why
telling me
didn't
how.
Why didn't he have any more children with her? I don't know. Maybe
But
I don't know.
No, I-
Again, I'm just trying to show you. That's the let's take a look in Parashat Ba'alotcha quickly. I'm just going to show you again the same concept.
What's the Holocaust?
Ba'alotcha is the story with the 70 elders. Take a look over there. Here, Esfali Shivim Zekenim. Take a look. It says, "Gather me 70 elders, and I will speak with them." Okay. Let me show you what it says. Okay.
But
Where
when
they
Rashi
go?
is saying Yesh Omrim,
Yesh omrim or yesh omrim. That means we can follow. Which one?
What? It's opinions in the Gemara. It's opinions in the Gemara.
Some rabbi said
Okay.
this, some rabbi said
Yeah,
that.
okay, so you know what? I'm not gonna find this one for you now, but it's there too. My point is like this. Comes along the Shalah HaKadosh. The Shalah HaKadosh says something very interesting. He says both Perushim are emet. They're both true over here. And he reconciles the two. And he says, let me explain to you what's going on. Says the Shalah HaKadosh. He says, the Perush that says that Velo Yasaf means that it didn't continue and it didn't add on. Lo Yasaf is like Lo Hosif. He didn't add on more. It never happened again. It stopped, right? What that means is like this. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the mitzvot, he gave the 10 commandments. So those 10 commandments, like we said, included all 613 mitzvot. But not only did it include all 613 mitzvot, the Gemara, Masechet Megillah, and other places as well, many places it says that it included in those mitzvot every little detail that would ever come up in the future as well. Everything that any rabbi would ever establish. For example, Shlomo Melech established we have to wash netilat yadayim. He also established we have to have eruvei chatzerot, which is different rules. All of the rules that any chacham or any bed din would ever come up with ever in the future, it was all given at that moment. All of it. Lo yasaf means There was nothing more that was ever added on because all of those things to begin with were given at Har Sinai. It was never added on anymore because it was all there from the beginning.
It was already there.
It was already there.
Oral.
Everything. So now, what does it mean then that it didn't stop? If you learn Lo Yasaf means it didn't stop. It says, you know what it means? It means that the very voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving over the 10 commandments and giving over all these mitzvot, that voice never stopped giving over those 10 commandments. The voice is always there. There are certain chachamim that have the special fine-tuning through their learning and through their work, that their ear is able to tune into what's being said. For example, the Chizkuni, one of the great Mefarshim, writes in his introduction to the Torah that he heard, he's one of the Rishonim, he writes, he heard Hashem saying the 10 commandments. He had a dream one time, and he heard Hashem saying the 10 commandments. There's such a thing.
But nobody heard the thing about it.
What do you mean? Everybody heard the 10
They heard
commandments.
the first two.
They heard the first two, fine. But the point is that the Chizkuni is saying he had a dream. This is one of the Rishonim. He says he had a dream. He heard the 10 commandments.
But why did
I'll give you an example. I want to.
Torah says after the first war, they said to Moshe Rabbeinu, we can't be dying.
Correct. 100%. That's true. They didn't hear. After number 2, they stopped and they had to have Moshe say it to them. True. My point is that there was a moment in history when all of Am Yisrael heard Hashem speaking. You see, as we sit here right now, there are millions, if not billions, of words traveling through our ears right now. If you think about a cell phone tower and how many telephone calls are physically passing through our bodies this second, and we can't even hear one of them. If we want to, we can take out our telephones and we can make a phone call, and that way, but through the invention of a telephone, we could hear those radio waves. We could hear those sound waves. But if not for that, our ears are not able to be fine-tuned to it. We don't hear it. Understand? So both Pirushim are emet. Says the Shalah HaKadosh, what it means is that at the beginning, when Hashem gave us those Aseret HaDibrot, everything was already included in it. But that never stopped. That sound is still there, always there. You just have to know how to fine-tune it. Says the Tzad Zerav, the Shefa Chaim, he says an amazing thing. He says, it's not just that, it's everything. Every Rambam, whatever he wrote, any halacha that the later generation wrote, it's all there. And it was all there embedded. If you would look closely at the 2 stone tablets, you would see, if you know how to see, you would see every Rambam there. You would see every Mishnah there. You would see every Gemara there. You would see it. Now you say to yourself, well, how could you see it? Well, I see a stone. What do you mean? The answer is, nowadays it's easy. This is a beautiful point from Rabbi Ben Porat Shlita. He says this beautiful point. He says, nowadays it's easy to believe these things. We used to have emunat chachamim, but nowadays it's easy to believe. You know why? Take out any USB drive. And what's on a USB drive? You can have an entire encyclopedia. You can have an entire library of 50,000 books uploaded to a USB drive the size of my thumb. You ask yourself, well, how'd that happen? Right? Where's a book over here? Show me a book. This is a book. That's a book. Where's a book over here? Right? Point is, but it's there. It's literally there. There's 50,000 books over there. Right? So that's what the 10, that was the Aseret HaDibrot. It was all in there. That's why it was so unique. So those who are able to understand how it relates to each one, and how the Rabbanan relates to each one, that is a very special level. We might not necessarily know it, but we believe that's why it's so special. I had a thought, I don't know if this is accurate or not, but we know that there are 7 mitzvot that the rabbis made us do. Megillah, right? Megillat Esther, Chanukah, Netilat Yadayim, Eruv, what else? A couple more, right?
Eruv is not from the Torah. It's not.
No, it's Midrabanan.
Eruv from Shabbat.
Eruv Chatzerot is Shlomo Melech made it, Netilat Yadayim, the different mitzvot that there are 7 of them, Hallel, right? So I was thinking, it could say, as the Midrash obviously said differently, like we said, that also that there are 620 letters in the 10 Commandments, 613 for these 613 mitzvot and 7 for the 7 days of creation. Then you could say also 613 for the 613 mitzvot, Doraita, and another 7 for the 7 Rabbanan. They're all there. It's all in the Aseret HaDivrot. It's all there. That's the point. So V'lo Yasaf, says the Shalach Kadosh, means that sound that Hashem initially gave to the world, that had everything already in it, and it never stopped. They're both.
It never stops.
It keeps on going, and you should know, by the way, it's not a foreign concept. When they talk about this in science, they say that they sometimes pick up on radio waves or television waves from like the 1950s that are traveling in outer space, because when you release the sound, it goes out and it never goes away. It stays there forever.
They hear from the
Yes,
sky.
exactly. And you can, if you tune into it, you can get it. If you have the right tools to tune into it, you can get it. So that's the significance of the Aseret HaDibrot, that it contains everything. It's very important to understand that. But most important is to understand that at that moment, our entire faith was solidified. That's the key to remember that. Okay, guys, Chazakim Muchim will stop over here. Thank you very much.
Rabbi,
If you have any